Hello, my love. We meet again.
Hello. We're so
So nice
excited
to
for
see
today.
you. I am
Nice
too.
to see you.
Yes, so this is our new adventure studying the Tarot
Hmm.
or Tarot, depending on who you're hearing speak it. And people will hear me say both. I don't know
Hmm.
why. Sometimes I use one, sometimes the other. And we've both studied this for many, many years, and we found it to be useful. And we want to share our experience with it, and then share the I hesitate to use the word formal, but share the formal teachings behind the major arcana of the tarot.
When did you first start learning about this? Do you remember what year it was?
Oh gosh. Um 2002.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
So I started learning this in the fall of 2015 or
Right.
early 2016. It might have been about this time, actually,
Mhm.
of the year.
Yeah.
And, we're going to be talking about the tarot cards, and most people have seen a traditional tarot deck, but the cards that we're going to be talking about in depth are called the major arcana.
Mhm.
So there are 21 cards, right?
22.
22 cards in the major arcana.
Mhm.
And when I started learning tarot, I started, I think, maybe 16 cards in.
Oh, I remember that now. Yes,
I
you started.
started with the Tower.
Yes.
Oh, no, I think it was actually the Deceiver. It was one of those two.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the perfect place to start.
Yes. There's lots of coincidences. People will notice that. It's one of my favorite things about anytime I have done a study of this or anytime we've taught it, and work with a group of people, all of these sort of amazing coincidences start to sort of come out of the woodwork.
Mm.
And I think that's part of the quote unquote magic of this. Um, it's tapping into the universal unconscious, the collective unconscious. That's what all of this symbolism in these cards represents. So it only makes sense that as we consciously engage with a study of universal symbolism and the truth of the collective unconscious, that experiences of that will start to come into our awareness, right?
Hmm.
And coincidences or um, you know, divine revelation or all of these things that have sort of a mystical, magical kind of overtone to them. There's less mystical ways of explaining them, but I think it's a fun part of the experience for people to see how the events in their life and the things they've been thinking about suddenly somehow correspond perfectly with where they are in the particular
And the
study.
study, yeah, the study of the cards.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about the tarot is that it's like another language. And
Okay.
I love learning languages. I always have. Um, and so we're going to be talking about the language of symbols and the language of the ancient Kabbalistic or ancient Christian symbols.
Hmm.
So it's just like learning, ancient French or ancient German. This is one aspect of like a way to describe your experience. It's
Right.
not the only way. You can also speak English, speak Spanish, whatever, but it's one really potent and cool way to talk about what you're experiencing in your life.
Yes. So I would also describe it as it's a study of consciousness. It's a study of God. It's a study of self, right? So as you're suggesting, there are many, many ways to go about the study of God, self, consciousness, the universe, creation, whatever word you want to use there.
Mhm.
There's lots of ways to go about doing that. Another one I'm a big fan of is dream work, Jungian
Mhm.
analysis. That's another way of going about the same sort of process of inner exploration, tapping into the universal component of the personal experience, right?
Yeah.
um this one I love, and you and I've talked about coming back and teaching it again. The reason for me to do this is because I think that it's fun. I think it's interesting. It's colorful. It's beautiful. It's creative. I just think there's so much kind of potency in the cards, the visuals, and in the conversations that come up around them. I think it's just a fun way to do it. But also it's in my experience, I have yet to have a personal experience or yet to sit down across from a client and have them describe what's going on in their life and not have some teaching from one of the cards pop into mind. Another way of putting that is that I have yet to see any life experience in myself or another that isn't already depicted in some way
Mm,
in these cards. And
mm,
so I love that. Well, I love all things archetypal, right?
mhm,
So that's, again, coming back to Jungian psychology. And one of the things I love about that is that I think in our experience of, again, life, therapy, spiritual growth, in whatever context you're using there, that things can feel so deeply personal, right? When we're caught in the middle of whatever's going on for us, it feels like it's about us. I have these problems. I'm trying to do this. This is about me. It's something in me I need to fix. Nobody else knows what's going on. This is such a deeply personal thing, right?
mhm.
And then we have something like this that sort of shows you that, well, yes, you're having a personal experience, but it's so well known that it was mapped out thousands of years ago,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
There's so much known about it that that there's a picture of it right here, and you can look at that picture and study it and listen to what others have taught about it, and see if that doesn't help you move through your personal experience of whatever is going on there. So I think it's a great tool for that.
Yeah. And as someone who, when I first started learning about the tarot, I really looked at it like a religion. Like it
Mhm.
was a set of rules that I was going to follow and figure out who I was and where I was from this map. And I'm looking forward to talking about this, now 7 years later, almost 8 years later, I guess, from a more mature perspective, from a place of so much um, more growth and awareness of myself, um, and in a more fun way,
Yeah. Mhm.
rather than in a, well, what am I going to suffer next
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's probably a good segue into some of the caveats, which you've
Hmm.
already hinted at. This is not a religion.
Hmm.
It is roughly connected with religion in quotes. It's really more connected with uh, mysticism, spiritual mysticism, but its roots are in Kabbalah, which is came out of older forms of Jewish mysticism, that really kind of came into its fullness. I don't know, maybe 15th, 16th century, something like that.
Hmm.
The tarot itself dates back to, depending on who you talk to or ask, 1200 AD, maybe at the oldest. Um, the oldest well-known versions of the tarot is in a museum, I think in Italy, and that set dates back to, I think, 1390,
Hmm.
so 14th century. So it's at least that old, if not maybe a couple hundred years older. And so it does have its roots in Judaism, but the mystical components of that. But it's not a religion. Um, other caveats. It's not fortune telling, right? That's one of the most common associations, because that's sort of the common usage of the cards is people who are mystics or just claim to be mystics, use these as tools for paid work with people to sort of help them divine what's unfolding in their life. And I'm not suggesting that it can't be used for that, but that's not their original intent per se.
Hmm.
um
Yeah,
I mean,
but so many things have evolved
yeah,
beyond their original intent, right? The
right.
Bible itself and many
Yeah,
other.
and I've never really done that. I have nothing against using them in that way, but if that's all people are doing, I think they're missing most of what is there to be gained from an actual quote unquote study of the tarot.
Mm.
There's a lot of deep universal truth and a lot that we can learn about the nature of consciousness and of self by really digging into each one of these cards, which we're going to do over a series of 22 or 23 podcasts.
Can I ask you a real foundational question that I
Sure.
have been asked for years, and I'd love to hear how you explain it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define mysticism versus religion? And why are these mystical versus
Yeah.
religious?
That's a great question. I'm going to use a picture
Okay.
to
I love that you just have a picture on hand for this.
Mhm. It's one of my favorite pictures.
Mm. Is it of me?
Pull up a good version of it here. Okay, and then I'll do a screen share. Okay. To me, this is an image of mysticism.
Mm.
Okay. This is a very famous engraving. It's actually a wood engraving originally. The color is a flourish that came later. And so what we would have here would be what we would call the waking world, the quote unquote real world, so to speak, as we use the term real in common vernacular, our everyday regular world. You can see little houses and little suburban. So this is the world of everyday human experience, and this is the mystic saying, I don't think this is everything there is to know about creation, about existence.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what's behind the veil, so to speak. And so there he is, peeking his head behind the veil, looking at sort of the inner workings, the machine behind the play. And so to me, this is a great image that captures the essence of mysticism. So for me, mysticism is an exploration of the truth. It is an exploration of the self, of the universe. It's asking essential questions like, who am I? What am I? Mysticism, you could use a less fancy term, self-inquiry. So in the non-dual tradition, self-inquiry is the term that's used to describe this type of exploration of what is deeper than the sort of surface layer of life experience. And mysticism of this type is completely independent of any particular culture, of any particular race, of any particular human figure or leader, of any external authority. It has nothing to do with any of those things, except perhaps roughly by association, but it's not dependent on those things, right? So you can have a Christian mystic, Saint John of the Cross, Meister Eckhart are two of the better known, more famous Christian mystics. You
Teresa
can
of
have,
Avila.
what's that?
Teresa of Avila.
Yeah. Yep. Saint Teresa of Avila is another Christian mystic. You can have Jewish mystics, of whom
Sufi.
I can't
Yeah.
name.
Hindu.
Jewish, Sufi, Buddhism almost by its nature is mystic. Buddhism is not a religion. They don't worship Buddha as a deity per se. And so you can have mystics within various traditions, and if you talk to those mystics, the conversations that they have all sound alike. They're all saying the same thing regardless of what tradition they come from. And that's how you can really tell when somebody's truly a mystic, because what they say aligns perfectly with what mystics from other traditions say, because the truth is the truth.
It's all the same, or mostly the same. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me stop this share. So
What about
versus
religion then?
versus religion, right? Which religions have hierarchical structure, typically. The Catholic Church is a great example. They have a central figure, typically. So again, Christianity, the central figure is Jesus. We'll say Buddhism, but it's not technically really a religion in the same sense, but the Buddha. Judaism has several, Moses, Abraham are its sort of historic origins. And they're all oriented towards the worship of an external deity, right? So Christianity would be Jesus, Judaism would be Yahweh. It's not 100% across the board, but like Hinduism has many deities that they worship. Although even in Hinduism, you can kind of work up the ladder to Brahman, right? So religion is really about the worship of something external versus mysticism, which is about a movement inward. Even though in that image the man is poking his head outward, it's really symbolic of looking beyond, looking deeper. And ultimately that process in mysticism is really a process of inner exploration. So when we translate that over to the tarot, whatever it is that we're learning when we study these cards, what we're really doing is learning about the truth of what is already there within us, right? We're not adding something to us. We're reminding ourselves of what is there. We're reminding ourselves about the truth of who we are, what we are, etc. So it is an inner exploration, right? So maybe the best way to summarize that is using those words. Mysticism is an inner exploration, and religion is an outer directed exploration.
Right. So when I started learning this, despite it being presented as an opportunity for inner exploration, I still approached it as if it was a religious doctrine.
Okay. Right. So some added clarification, because there is this overlap with the history of this teaching, tarot as a whole. Okay. Again, dates back maybe to some time between 13th and 14th century. Those people who came together to help to develop this were probably members of the various major religions present in the world at the time, right? And they probably brought some of that energy with them for sure, but they would have all been mystics, right? Because only mystics from the various religious traditions can come together and say, hey, we all know what's up and we need to help people understand it, which was the point of doing this. The idea behind the creation of these cards is that the members of these various religious traditions wanted to make sure that the quote unquote truth, the real teachings that were similar or equivalent across all of the different religious traditions were actually maintained in a form that wouldn't be destroyed. So there was a lot of persecution going on at the time, in particular by the Catholic Church, right? And if you were saying things and teaching things that weren't in alignment with formal Catholic teaching, then you could be burned at the stake as a heretic, right?
Right.
So you didn't.
The books were burned and things.
And
like
the
that.
books were burned, teachings were destroyed, etc. So you didn't want to be going around promoting the idea that you had access to the truth and that it was freely available to anybody who wanted to study it for themselves. That's really the essence of mysticism.
Sure.
Whereas the essence of religion is hierarchical. It says, no, we know what's up. We being the priests, the rabbis,
the leaders, people in power.
Yep, the people in power. And And if you give us enough money and show up consistently enough, we will over time teach you. And if you're lucky, maybe you can become closer to God with our help. Right. So everything in Tarot is totally opposite of that. This teaching says the truth is already within you. And here's a bunch of pictures that are going to resonate with your subconscious mind through the universal symbolism, the shapes, the numbers, the colors, etc. That's going to remind you of the truth that's already there. And you don't need anybody's help to access that. You couldn't teach that. You couldn't say that 1,000 years ago. It wasn't safe to do that. So there is this relationship with religion, but the cards themselves are actually meant to transcend all religion.
Right. I'm just marveling at the dichotomy for me at that time in my development of coming into something that's supposed to teach me about what I already know.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there furiously taking notes.
Right.
Jotting down everything that the teacher was saying about this card and its symbology and what it meant, and how to think about it and how to interpret it and how to work with it. And it's so my encouragement for anyone watching this is to we're going to offer you some guidance about the historical symbolism and some of the collective unconscious symbolism, and then look at each card with your own eyes, with joyful eyes, with thoughtful eyes, not, well, Noah said this means this, and Jamie said this means this.
Yeah.
There is no rules to this. This is meant to be for each of us to explore, and uniquely every time we do so. Every time we look at the card, it's a fresh experience, or it can be.
Yes. Yeah. Even just in sort of picking this up again for the first time in a couple of years.
3 years, I think it's been.
What's that?
I think it's been 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
It's different for me. And to your point, one of the things that we recommend with the study is that we'll have links for all of this, but here's the first card in the major arcana. And you can buy these in blanks like this that you can then color in. And traditionally, that's been a big part of the study. One of the all-time experts of Tarot, Paul Foster Case, who we'll talk about, got a couple books we'll recommend. To him, that was actually essential. That was like, if you're not doing that, don't bother. And it's in particular because of what you just said, that this is really about our personal exploration. And there's something about starting with the blank card and with instructions about what color goes where, right? You just color it in, and there's something that's activated within us when you add your own sort of unique essence to the card by coloring it in yourself. There's something alchemical that takes place when it's this intersection of our personal volition with universal consciousness when we do that. And that's where a lot of the magic happens in terms of activating within our subconscious mind whatever truths are there being passed on to us in symbolic form. Yeah.
And I would just add to that, because you pause there for a second, because I am who I am and I have an inherent rule breaker inside of me, I never colored the freaking cards in, because it felt like, something someone was telling me to do, and I wasn't going to do it if it didn't make logical sense to me.
Yep.
But what I also really loved is I went out and purchased a lot of different tarot decks and looked at each artist's rendition of them and compared and got a feel for what the shared expression of the card was, not just the one card that was like the approved card.
Yeah.
But I explored outside of the boundaries of that. And I think that gave me a lot too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And,
coloring is great, but if you can't find the time to do that, you'll still get a lot out of it.
Again, we're not setting, it's not a religion. There are no rules here. I will make suggestions.
Yeah.
I will tell you what has been classically been taught. I will tell you what has worked for me. I will tell you what I've liked, and
Mhm.
then do whatever the hell you want.
That's why we're teaching it this way now.
Yeah.
You want to
So
go on to show the tableau, maybe?
yes. So let's do that and give you a sort of roadmap of what it is we'll
What
be
we'll
doing.
cover.
So I'll start with a more colorful artistic rendering here first, because it shows all the cards. So here's all the cards of the major arcana laid out from 0 to 21. So 22 cards, 0 to 21. And they're in 4 rows. Okay. These are hard to see. I just want to show them because it shows all 4 rows. It shows the top row consists of only the Fool, and then there's the 3 rows that follow.
Mhm.
Okay, so this is referred to as the tableau. This is the cards laid out in order in this very particular arrangement. Okay, here's a more clear version of it that's easier to see. I wanted to show the other one because it had the Fool. You can just see the edge of the Fool here. Just know that the Fool card is floating up there, just out of picture. So the cards are laid out like this for a very specific reason. So there's a couple ways to conceptualize what we might call the progression of consciousness, or the evolution of consciousness, of self, our spiritual path, our journey. There's so many different terms you can use. And it's starting up here with 0, and then it's coming down and just simply going in order from 1 in the upper left, across the top row, and then down and across the second row, and then down and across to the end. Okay. That is one way of progression, and that's how we'll actually teach the cards. We'll teach them in numerical order. Okay. Another way of progression is from top down. Okay. And I'll explain how that works. We need to understand that these 4 rows each represent a different, we could say, level of reality. The top row is the archetypal realm, which is a realm of pure ideas, essentially. No form, just ideas. Let me just name them for you. It's archetypal, and then this is the creative realm. This next row is the formative realm, and then the final row is the material realm. Okay. So we have the realm of pure idea in the archetypal realm, and then this first full row here is the creative realm, which is where ideas begin to have some form associated with them. There isn't actually a form yet, but there's a concept. There's the pure idea that's beginning to have some specificity, the beginning of its creation. And then in the middle row here, the formative realm, we have, this is the realm of process. This is where things are happening. Things are taking place. This is the food being cooked. It's not done. It's not raw, but it's also not finished. It's in process. And then in the final row here, we have the material realm. This is where things actually come to be in their kind of complete form in the world. Okay. So when we
Can you make
study,
a metaphor of like a woman giving birth with this? This whole the rows and stuff, where it was always very confusing to me, and I think it's confusing for a lot of people.
yeah, sure, I've never done that, but let me see.
Use like something tangible, like
Yeah, well, I
giving
mean,
birth or
let's go with that. Let's make it fit, because hypothetically, again, this is one of the cool things about tarot. Literally any idea should work. It
okay.
has to. This is universal. It has to work. So you have the idea of new life. of giving birth, of we want to have a child. You haven't had sex yet. You've just talked about it. It's just an idea.
Okay,
Right?
great.
That would be the archetypal realm. It's simply an idea. Hey, do you want to have a kid? Okay. I know what your answer is. No pressure. We have the same
That's a
answer.
no.
We're all good. So then you have the creative realm. Okay, that is where the idea, the first bringing of that idea into creation, the creative realm, begins to take place. So this would be the realm of actual intercourse. This is having sex. There's no child yet. There isn't even really the beginnings. There's no orgasm, right? There's just the activity of sex that brings the idea of a child out of the realm of pure idea and begins to give it some shape. Okay. And then you have the formative realm. So this would be insemination has occurred and you are technically pregnant, right? Except there's a whole process that has to take place for the single cell, well, two cells, I suppose, a sperm and an egg, right? Which then becomes the one, fertilized. You have a fertilized egg that is not a child at that point. Let's skip the where life begins debate. That's not where I'm
We're not doing that.
It's not where I'm intending to go with this, but I think most people would agree that a single cell is not the same thing as a human child, right? The intent up here, the idea here was not to create a single cell. The intent was to create a human being with 4 limbs that can talk and walk and breathe. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
And so here we've got the process happening where if we allow that process to continue to unfold, then you will ultimately get the desired outcome, which is a human being. This is the material. So once the child is born into the world, you now have entered the material realm. You have the real tangible child. It's the end result. Okay.
Cool. Thank you. That's helpful.
There's an example that Paul Foster Case uses as well. Let's use the idea of a chair. Okay. A chair is a thing. In the archetypal realm, there are no things. There's just ideas. So up here would be the idea of sitting. Okay. Here in the creative realm would be the idea of sitting combined with the need for something to sit on. Okay. And so all possible chairs are present here in the creative realm. In the formative realm is the process of beginning to build an actual chair. So once we get into formation, this isn't all chairs. All chairs do not live here. A specific chair lives here. A specific chair is being taken from pure idea and into form. And then here in the material realm, the chair has been built. And you have an actual physical chair in the world that you can sit on.
Great.
So on our spiritual journey, to use that particular phrase at this moment, that's where we look at this progression from top to bottom instead of just left to right in numerical order. Here we have a creative concept, creative idea. And then below that is the particular process associated with this creative idea. And if we take this creative idea and put it through this process, then we get a very specific outcome. And that's the top to bottom progression. That's true for each one of these columns. This card here is a very different creative principle. Principle is probably the better word to use here. This is a very different principle than this. Okay. So this principle, when we apply it through this process or agency, creates this material result, and so on at each level. So as we do this study, You've already given the caveat, but everybody's going to do it anyway. So let's just say you're going to try to figure out where you are on the map. Fine, that's okay. Let me spoil the ending for you. You're everywhere on the map.
Yeah.
However, the other truth is that at certain times and places, you will have a stronger association with specific locations on the map here, so to speak, right? In particular, the bottom row here, this bottom row of manifestation is referred to as the path of spiritual unfoldment. These are the cards that represent the quote unquote stages of spiritual development that we actually manifest and go through in our life experience. So it goes from over here to complete imprisonment by illusion, all the way over here 7 stages later to being a walking god, or in this case a floating god, being an avatar, being a perfected human being. This is Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, whoever else has walked the earth as a god, fully human and fully divine. Okay, so this is the perfect human being over here. This is the totally asleep human being over here, and these are the stages of development in between. Okay, so if we find ourselves particularly associated with one of these stages, and for most of us, don't stress out, folks. 99% of humanity is either here or here. One of these first 2 stages. This is not something we have to take personally. But let's say you're identified in particular with this stage here. We study this card and you go, boy, that really feels like where I am in my life right now. And I feel like I'm trying to have a better grasp of what's symbolically represented over here. Well, then you can work your way back up here and spend some time studying the principles associated with the Empress card. Understand how the agency of the Wheel of Fortune can be applied to your life, and become an active participant in this alchemical process that helps to move you into this 3rd stage of spiritual unfoldment. Is that well enough explained?
That's lovely. Yeah, that's great.
So,
it's a good intro.
and again, even as we say this, even as I say all that, that is how we're going to use this, and that is the right way to use it, so to speak. And also at the same time, don't get too invested in this being linear and hierarchical. Okay. I say that you're going to do it anyway, but I just want to be on record. It's okay.
Right.
Don't get too caught up in this being better than or worse than, or needing to hit a certain thing by a certain age, or none of these cards are better or worse than any other. And even when your life experience seems like it says I'm here, right, you're actually all of this at all times. And that in fact, going through this process of study, the whole purpose is to help you recognize that and remember that. So
yeah, I mean, there's never been a time in my life, for instance, in which I have not been partially in the deceiver card, which is the card of ignorance. And as much as I don't, nobody likes, people have a strong aversion to the symbology of that card, the deceiver card, which is in the bottom left, because it looks demonic, and I mean, there is the devil in it. But that card has so much more meaning. There's so much deeper meaning in the symbology of the people who are chained, and how loose the chains are. And it's okay to be connected to the energy of the deceiver. It is a human experience. It's very human, and we tend to want to deny that. I'm not there. I'm not ignorant. Well, we are, because we're growing all the time and evolving all the time.
Yeah. So to your point, we could safely say that when one reaches this state, it actually includes all of these other states.
Mhm.
simultaneously, right? And so putting that in more kind of mundane human psychological language, um, part of being a perfect human is understanding what you don't know.
Yeah.
It
Being
means it means
self-aware,
it means yeah. It doesn't mean you know
literally.
everything. It means you know what you don't know, and that somehow knowing what you don't know is a part of what it means to know everything, right?
Mm.
So we don't leave all of this behind forever when we go from left to right. And the same is true um, at these higher levels here. This first row, when we get over to the chariot card, we'll talk about it. That this card is really an amalgam of all 6 cards that have come before.
Mhm.
Okay. So, very briefly, let me also just point out, say a few things. These 22 cards each have a Hebrew letter associated with them. So again, this is Kabbalistic in nature. They have a number and they have a Hebrew letter that we'll talk about briefly when we study each card. Each Hebrew letter has Hebrew is a very fascinating. It's a symbolic language, so it works perfectly with Tarot. Each Hebrew letter is a symbol that represents a word. So for example, let me go to this one. So the full card is the first one we'll study. That blurry Hebrew letter is called Aleph. It's the letter A, our letter A, or
Mm.
Alpha, Aleph, and it means ox. So just the letter itself has a very specific meaning.
Mhm.
It's a word in and of itself. And then it has a number associated with it as well, and every number also has particular subconscious, universal, symbolic meaning and qualities that we'll talk about when we study that. So each card has a letter and a number associated with it. It also has like a musical note, an overarching theme. There's all kinds of stuff associated with each card that we'll
Planets.
mention.
Yeah.
What's that?
Planets.
Planets. Yeah, these map onto the zodiac. So if you're interested in astronomy, each card has an astrological sign
Mhm.
that is associated with it, that it rules. So or that governs it. So there's all kinds of fun associations. And then finally, this is from Kabbalah. This is the tree of life, and you can see that on these branches of the tree that connect each of the different. These are called the singular is Sapphira, and the plural collectively these circles or spheres are called Sephirith. And so connecting the Sephirith are these branches, and you can see each of the 22 cards is laid out on one of these branches.
Mhm.
So you have the tree of life, which is the 10 Sephirith, and you have connections between each Sephirith, each of which has a particular card of the major arcana associated with it. So we will talk about this. The tree of life is its own study. We're more interested in the tarot specifically, but as we study each card, we'll come back and revisit the tree of life. So for example, the Fool card is here. So this is the first card that we study. And so what this tree of life overlay shows us is that when we're studying the Fool card, we're also studying the first and second Sephirith. Okay. Crown,
Mhm.
or in Hebrew is Keter. You'll see there's Hebrew somewhere. I have this one's got the Hebrew names. So Keter, Chokmah, and this is the Aleph letter that we showed. This is the branch of the Fool. We'll talk about what each of these spheres represents on the tree of life as well.
Cool.
Okay. And the idea with this study is that it helps us understand this picture of the tree of life without giving away too many secrets. The one here is crown. This would be the equivalent of, let's say, the Big Bang. This is the beginning of creation. This is the beginning of time and space. Happens here. And then consciousness, life force, God energy, whatever you want to call it, moves down from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 to 10. And when it gets down here, you have creation, you have reality, you have earth. The kingdom is made up of 4 elements: air, earth, water, fire. So you have physical reality here. And so, as I mentioned at the very beginning, when we study Tarot, we study Kabbalah, we study the Tree of Life, we're studying the universe. We're studying the explosion of consciousness into manifestation. And then we're also studying the movement back up. And this is what we would call, again, the spiritual journey. You can look at it on the tableau as a process of going from 0 across to 22, to 21 on the 22nd card. You can also look at it on the Tree of Life and understand that if this is the process of manifestation of God coming down into creation, so to speak, and here we are, human beings with personal identity here, our spiritual path is the movement back up to understanding our true nature, which can be found again up here.
Wonderful.
Okay.
I think that's a great
what
start.
we'll be doing over the next 22 podcasts that will probably take us a year. That's what it took last time. Or 48 weeks if we do one every 2 weeks. And in the description here associated with this particular podcast, we will share some links to books, to the cards that you can order in color. There's a book of meditations as well that I love that I'll do some reading from with each podcast. So you can order as much of the materials as you would like. If you just want to listen to each podcast once, and that's as much as you want to do, great.
That's fine.
That's fine.
I've written poems for each of these cards. I'll probably share those again.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes. And the last time we taught this, there were meditations that we did for each card. So I'll probably reboot those, maybe redo some of them, make them fresh. It'll be really fun.
Great. Okay. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too.
Okay.
Until next time.
See everybody for the Fool card.